Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. Excuse me one sec. Just wanted to get my glasses. I forgot them over there. Anyways, I want to welcome you here on a Sunday night to Commonalities Compared. This is an episode that we do every Sunday night in which Ben, a subscriber friend of mine, gives me a couple of commonalities in rock and I talk about them. So usually it's either two bands or two albums, or maybe two album covers, or perhaps an artist, or perhaps a bass player or a guitar player. But the point is they all have something in common with them, and then I talk about them. And tonight he's given me a couple. I wasn't quite sure when I first seen it. I thought, what's the connection here? And then became very obvious after a while what it was. So the two we're going to be doing tonight are two bands, Fleetwood Mac, represented here by Rumors, and Heart, Dreamboat Annie. These are probably their two best albums, arguably. Probably my two favorite albums by them, but it doesn't. I'm not a connoisseur of Fleetwood Mac for sure. Probably not of Heart either, although there's definite sound that I like from Heart that is offered up on two or three of their albums for sure, which sets them apart from Fleetwood Mac that way, because Fleetwood Mac for me has basically the one album that I like quite a bit, and then a couple of others that I don't mind. I never really went back in their discography. Probably should. If I were to see them somewhere, I probably would get them all, really, to be honest with you. They're a good, solid band. So, anyways, the commonality with these two bands, we'll start. So Fleetwood Mac started in the late 60s, I believe, early 70s. You can correct me if you want. I don't know as much about their history. I do know a little bit about their history, but not quite sure when they started. Heart was much later, probably in the mid 70s with this album, which I believe was released in 75 or 76. 76. So a few years later. They do have a couple of things in common initially. So even though Heart kind of picked up on it a little bit later, so their histories are similar at the same time. They evolved different time periods. So with Fleetwood Mac, they were kind of I believe they were kind of a bluesy band early on with some kind of rocky flavor to their music, but not necessarily a pop band at all. And then eventually they became a pop super juggernaut band in the time period of this album. So I think it started with their self-titled. They've had two self-titled albums. The second one, which came out, I believe, in 76 or 75, one of those 2 years, which brought a change about it, this band, which then began them moving forward as a kind of a pop iconic band, which featured two females, both doing lead vocals in Christine McVie and Stevie Nicks. So a band somewhat dominated by female vocals, but not initially. They had male vocals, and they still had male vocals even with the two women on the band, where Heart was pretty much dominated by Ann Wilson's voice, although you do get lots of backup vocals from the other members of the band, including her sister Nancy here. So they also started out originally in that kind of folky, kind of bluesy, kind of rocky sound that was common in that time period, and evolved over 4 or 5 albums until they completely changed their sound in the 80s and became somewhat like Fleetwood Mac, not in sound, but in direction, where they went off and became a commercial sounding pop band that had lots of hits. Well, they both did that. Heart doing it in the 80s, Fleetwood Mac doing it in the late 70s. I would have to say that the Fleetwood Mac poppy stuff is amongst my favorite of their music, because I haven't listened to the other stuff, where with Heart, it was the bluesy, folky stuff that I really like. I I can't listen to any of the stuff that came out in the 80s at all. Way too poppy for me. Of course, they both were 5-piece bands for most of that time, I believe. I might be wrong, but they where with Fleetwood Mac, they definitely had a keyboardist that was major influence. I don't believe Heart had that as much and not as influential as their more rocky side. So they had a couple of guitar players, and both had prominent drummers, although I think Mike DeRosa was a much better drummer than Mick Fleetwood was. The bass was, pretty much indiscriminate in both bands to me, but pretty much dominated by songwriting and catchy stuff. Both bands dominated by strong female vocals, especially from Stevie Nicks in Fleetwood Mac. Her voice is very distinctive, and Wilson's voice, of course, goes without saying, is one of the great rock voices of all time. So those are your comparisons. I prefer Heart only because two of their first three albums, I think, are absolutely stellar and masterpieces for me. I don't have a masterpiece album in my masterpiece collection for Fleetwood Mac. This album has a chance to get there eventually, but I'm not sure it will. It hasn't really stood up as well over time for me, although it's got a lot of stuff on here. Go Your Own Way, Don't Stop, The Chain. I can't remember what the other song was. There was one other one here, and I'm not seeing it because it's probably not on this album. It might be on their debut. I would call myself a fair weather Fleetwood Mac fan. I like some of their stuff, but I can only take so much of them. Where Heart, I consider myself a fan. I do like their stuff, especially the early stuff. I actually don't like their stuff in the 1980s much at all. They basically, for me, had 5 albums, and then that was it. They might as well be a different band. So there you go. That's my take on Heart and Fleetwood Mac and the commonalities that they have with each other and some of the differences as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Commonalities Compared. Please hit the like and subscribe. That's much appreciated. If you want to make any comments about either band, you're free to do so. I know I'll take a little bit of hits from a little bit for the stuff I said about Fleetwood Mac. Now, in defense of Fleetwood Mac, the early stuff from the late 90s to when they changed and took on Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks may very well be very good stuff. I haven't had the chance to explore it. It's not something that I've thought much about exploring, but if I see the albums, I will get them. It might open the door for me for the Peter Green era is it Walsh? I can't remember his first name, who is also with the band in his era as well. So I may get into them if a chance comes to do so. So in defense of them, I will give them credit for that as well. As for Heart, I'm sure that I will continue to love them as much as I always have. So anyways, I hope to see you all. If you want to make comments, like I said, put them in the comment section. And hopefully we will see you next Sunday night for another episode of Commonalities Compared. And have yourself a good night and a good evening. Take care and goodbye.